The person who so many of my friends know as Auntie Margaret died on the 9th of February 2026, aged 93. Margaret was incredibly organised and in her lifetime wanted to make sure everything was in order for her funeral today. This is her life as she wanted you to remember her. Margaret was born in Ritter Street, Woolwich, on the 14th of April 1932 and lived there with her parents, Maud, born McCullough, and Alec McIntyre. Her parents had met when they lived next to each other in Woolwich Common, and Margaret had a happy but strict childhood. Margaret would later describe herself as a daddy's girl. When she was 2 years old, the family moved to the Vista in Eltham. Margaret left school at the age of 14 and she started to work as a trainee hairdresser, but decided this was not the career for her. She then began a tailoring apprenticeship with a firm called Waits in Plumstead, where she was taught to make bespoke men's jackets. During this time, Margaret met Rene Sales, who would become her closest friend for nearly 70 years. Rene's husband Bill and their daughters Peggy, Sandra and Shirley, and then their own families, would become a huge part of Margaret's life. In April 1951, Margaret first met her late beloved husband, Ken Binns, at a dance in Eltham. When remembering that evening, Margaret would tell of how Ken danced with her friend all night, but then walked Margaret home. After a 2-year courtship, they married on the 27th of June 1953. Margaret, with the help of her mother, made her wedding dress and also the dresses for her 4 bridesmaids, who were her friend Rene and 3 nieces, Pam, Marion and Jennifer. So that she could get married in Eltham Church, Margaret gave someone else's address, as her local church had coconut matting in the aisle and she thought it would affect the flow of her long veil. The flowers in her bouquet were dark red carnations that came from the Co-op florist in Woolwich. Margaret always loved flowers. Margaret and Ken would go on to have 56 very happy married years together, their union having been sealed with this 3-tiered fruitcake. They set up home in Belvedere, where they spent the rest of their married life together. They spent the first 25 years in Clive Road and then in 1978 moved to Walsingham Walk. In that year they celebrated their silver wedding anniversary. 25 years later they went on to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. Both Margaret and Ken led very active social lives. In their early days they were keen cyclists with Welbex Club and would often cycle long distances during weekends to such places as Oxford, Folkestone and even Brighton, a round trip of 130 miles travelled on the same day. Ken was an enthusiastic bowls player for many years, and although Margaret did not bowl herself, she became an associate member of Belvedere Bowls Club. There were regular coach trips, and Ken would be the seller of raffle tickets on the way, encouraging people to empty their wallets with his sense of humour and jokes. Margaret was a staunch supporter of their fundraising activities and provided many of the teas when they entertained visiting teams. The family of Margaret's mother's sister, the Bramleys, made up of Auntie Doris, or Auntie Dole, Uncle George, and their 3 sons, John, Rick and Nick, played a large part in Margaret's life. Ken and Margaret would holiday with him in Malta and Gozo, where her uncle was stationed, and they also went to Switzerland on a very memorable trip for Nick's marriage to Regula Steinemann in 1985. Margaret worked for the British Army at Woolwich Barracks and had the very skillful job of finishing many of the dress uniforms worn on ceremonial occasions. Later, Margaret went to work for Terry Berry at Alteration Tailors, where she altered clothes. Here she met Pauline, who would become another long-standing friend. Margaret worked there for many years and retired at the age of 70 in 2002. Margaret and Ken were blessed with a long and happy marriage, but in their last year of their time together, they spent the most time they had ever spent apart with Ken in Queen Mary's Hospital in Sidcup. He died there, aged 79, on the 1st of July 2009, with Margaret at his side, as she had always been. Having been unable to go on their dream holiday to Australia, either luck or fate brought Margaret's Uncle George to the UK from Australia for the first time in many years. Along with Nick and Regula over from Switzerland, they were all therefore able to support Margaret in her loss. This meant so much to her. I myself was then living in Australia, but flew back for the funeral where 4 of Ken and Margaret's godchildren had this picture taken with her. After Ken's death, her nephew and niece-in-law, Philip and Monica, gave Margaret a great deal of support at this very sad time for her. Life after Ken was very different for Margaret, as having always done things as a couple, she was now doing them on her own. However, she would often say to me that you have just got to get on with it, and took comfort from looking at the many photograph albums she had made of many happy memories she had had with her dear Ken. Margaret carried on going on the coach trips with the bowlers and became an honorary club member. She continued selling the raffle tickets on the coach trip before her self-imposed raffle retirement in 2017. While the first 2 Christmases after Ken's death Margaret wanted to spend on her own, she would later go to Folkestone for Christmas with her cousin-in-law Angela or stay at home, often with me. We would enjoy a hearty meal of Margaret's signature dish of a roast dinner with a gammon joint and would reminisce. Often her photograph albums would come out and we would look at old pictures, just as you are now. Margaret was also introduced to video calling and we would often speak to Nick on regular and have a virtual catch-up and laugh together. After 15 years of talking about going to visit them and their son Sam and his girlfriend Anna in Basel, Switzerland, the trip finally took place in July 2025 when Margaret was 93. We travelled on Eurostar and train via Paris for a very special holiday with the Bramley Steinemans that she thoroughly enjoyed. Something that perhaps many people here will associate with Margaret is her long-standing ability to send birthday, anniversary, Easter and Christmas cards. Meticulously recording special dates in her diary and on her wall calendar, her superpower was that she never forgot a birthday. Many people here today, or watching at home, were probably recipients of such a card. She also really enjoyed celebrating her own birthday, and there were many happy times for her on those days. Margaret and Ken had a very large extended family, being cousins, cousins-in-law, uncle and aunt, great-uncle and aunt, and great-great-uncle and aunt many times over. They also had 6 godchildren between them, in Nick, Sandra, Shirley, Paul, me, and Andrew. She took an interest in all our lives, to the very end of hers. With her continuous presence for so long, Margaret will be missed very much, and no birthday or Christmas will now seem complete without a card from her. And there ends Margaret's approved eulogy, but there's a little bit more I'd like to say. When I was sat with Margaret on that last day in a side room in Woolwich Hospital, I knew the time was coming, but I also knew she could hear me. Margaret would sometimes say to me about one day being with my Ken, and in the hospital I said to her, "You know, I think he's waiting for you." At home, she had a paper copy of this eulogy, and I knew that sometimes she would read it, so I said to her, "Shall we hear about your life together?" Via my hard drive on my phone, I read her life story aloud to her again. In the middle, though, I paused and said I thought we needed to add in a bit about our trip to Switzerland last year. So I wrote a paragraph, said I hoped that she thought that was all right, and then finished reading the words to her you've just heard. 2 minutes after I finished reading, Margaret died peacefully. I felt then, and I still do now, that for someone who was so organised, that she felt everything was complete, that she then felt she could sign off, that she was ready, that she could go now. I'm not religious, but when someone is no longer with us, I imagine them being where I think they would like to be. They could be at a special place, or with the people they wanted to see again. If I can see them there in my mind, then that is where they are to me. And so that is where Margaret is. Thank you, from all of us. Goodbye, Margaret.